Hello, everyone, and welcome to West Virginia Author. I'm your host, Kat Pleska, and with me today is author, poet, Jeff Tigelaar. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Kat. Happy to be here with you.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here as well.
Thank you.
Let's give us a little bit background about yourself. Tell us where you're from and what you do.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which if you're looking at the mitten, it's on kind of like the pinky side. Now I live in Huntington, and I work at the Cabell County Public Library. My wife teaches at Marshall in the English department, and we've got two kids, Charlotte and Sam. Charlotte is in her first year of college. Sam's a sophomore in high school, and we've been in Huntington for about 10 years.
10 years.
So,
okay. I didn't know how long. Jana is one of my colleagues at Marshall.
Yes.
And I knew you had a daughter that just went off to college.
Yes. Yep.
You know, and that's difficult.
It's a new thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
More difficult for us than her so far, it seems like. But,
yeah, they're always ready, but
yes.
You know, we're not.
Right.
For them to not have them in our nest.
Exactly.
And under our view. And
right.
we feel like bringing them, along safely.
Right.
So, okay, I noticed in reading about you on your website that you were once a reporter and an editor. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about that? How did that come about?
Yeah, so pretty closely after graduating from college, this was around 1999 actually, I got a job with a weekly newspaper in Grand Rapids area, and I worked there for about 5 years. First couple of years as a reporter, and then as an editor. It was a small weekly, or it was a chain of weekly newspapers, so that was something that really got me writing, and just a good practice of writing every day and cranking out stories. And it was a teacher in college who kind of directed me towards the college newspaper staff, and kind of first got me going in that direction and making me think of myself as a writer. So Virginia LeGrand was my English professor there, and I have her to thank for kind of tilting me in the writerly direction.
Good.
So,
I'm glad you mentioned her name. It's
yeah,
important.
Yeah.
It's important to acknowledge our mentors.
Absolutely.
That say, I see something in you and you need to follow this.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yep. Sometimes we have to be told.
Did you think about writing when you were growing up, or?
I think my first memory of being thinking of myself as a writer, or maybe my first attempt at a poem, maybe we should say, is it was like maybe third or fourth grade, and I actually remember the poem, or the title of it, and maybe the first 10 words. It was a poem called Jello, and the first 2 words were Jello, and it went, Jello, Jello, you're a good fellow, you wriggle and jiggle. And then it goes on from there at length, but I'm sure it continues like with that level
rhyming scheme. So you were a poet.
The power of rhyme, and as far as like as for memorability, and
that sounds like a jingle, a commercial jingle, maybe.
Yeah. And then let's see. Early on, well, actually, my first, I don't know if this is ironic or it's just humorously, my first published poem ever was food-based also. It was about edible underpants. And there was a journal that had a call for submissions about food and eating-based poems, and I had one. It was about edible underwear, but the whole joke of the gag, I guess, was that the people don't know what's going on. They think this is some really risque poem, but it turns out at the end, I'll spare you from reading the entire thing. But my wife was out of town at the time at a conference, and I was a stay-at-home dad, and the baby was sleeping on my lap, and I was very hungry, and the nearest food was in the bedside drawer. It was a novelty gift of of edible underpants that had been there for about 7 years, and that's what I ended up eating.
Might have been
so,
tad
for a
stale,
snack.
but
Yeah,
I ate it for a snack.
tasted bad. It tasted like soap, but so
I've
that
never
was my-
actually talked to anybody that actually ate
Yeah.
edible underwear.
I don't think you're. Yeah, it doesn't really. You're not maybe supposed to, but
That's
it happened.
wild. That's
So,
wild.
Food poems.
Do
Yeah.
you think of yourself as mainly a poet then?
In terms of like what I've been fortunate
when it
enough
comes
to
to
have
writing,
published.
when you
Yeah.
think about what kind of writer am I, is poet mainly what you think about?
Yeah, I never set out for that, but I think for a while it was primarily reporter or journalist. But then after that first poem, it got published at the first place that I sent it, and defying all the odds. So I thought, wow, I've heard. The percentages are much harder than this, and so then I kept at it with poetry, and then eventually the acceptance rate got down to like the more normal, like 1% or whatever. But I lucked out with that first one, and that really I stuck with it since then. And mostly what I've published since then is poems in journals. I've had an occasional essay or book review. But yeah,
Okay.
poems
All right.
first and foremost, and
Okay.
I like the playfulness of them, and I feel like there's no real rules for poetry. It's like
In a way,
if you have to
no.
define it, it's like play on a page. I think of it as.
That's a
and,
good way to put it.
And sometimes it can just be like a found piece, or like some eavesdropping, or finding a scrap can lead to a phrase, or which leads to a whole poem, and you just kind of leave it to the reader or the editor to decide if it's a poem. You know.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it, and I think anybody out there is watching. I mean, how do I become a poet? Play on the page that's got to be freeing, because we always think of poetry as being very profound, but also very complex. And who is the poem for? Sometimes it's for other poets. Sometimes it's for scholars.
Yeah.
And so we may whoop, go right over our head, or we have to work so very, very hard to understand. But I've learned over the years is what do you get out of it that works?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's just one interpretation of it.
Yep.
So who was an early influence on you as a poet? I mean, what poet influenced you?
Yeah, well, so we were talking before, and like I think what I tend to do is read where I'm at. Like I like try to delve into the local writers, and like when I moved to Huntington, the first memory I have of someone talking to me about writing was they mentioned, if you're into poetry, you should read Mary Moore and Art Stringer, and check them out. And then when I got a job at the library, a patron walked in one day, and it was Ron Houchin. And one of my coworkers said, if you like poetry, you should read that guy. That's Ron Houchin. He's amazing. He's got about 10 books upstairs if you wanna check him out. And so I did that. Same with Art and Mary, and have got to know them as well, and their work. And so that's been a mode that I try to plug into, because you really get to know a place and the people, and chances are they're around. You can talk to them.
Right.
When we were in Athens my wife was in grad school at Ohio University, and there was a poet, there still is, in the English department, Mark Halliday, and I had read some of his work before. I think I'd seen it in an anthology and really liked it, and then we ended up being in the same city, same department as him. But he was one of the first poets I ever remember thinking that poetry can use language that we use, like every day, like conversational.
That's right.
It doesn't have to be like this distant, lofty thing. It can be conversational. It can and it can tell a story, and it can be funny and fun. So, yeah.
I think that's good that you sought the local poets.
Yes.
I think that's very smart and very wise, because you need, as a writer, we have a tendency to be isolated, and so that way you're creating a community as well of support, and you all speak the same language.
Absolutely.
Basically, when you're talking about your art and your work.
Yeah, that's important. It becomes
Yes.
a smallish community, a small world, and you can offer support and accountability. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Does anybody else in your family write, as you were growing up, or anything like that?
I think I'm the first to go like that direction in terms of like professional, journalism and trying to publish. But I think several people in my family are capable writers, and yeah, I always tell people I'd like to see more work from them, and I tell that to my kids too, like
Oh, sure.
who might not think of themselves as writers yet. Just go with it. I think you're better than you think, and yeah, see what you can do, and
Okay,
if you have a
good.
little inkling, just
Well,
run with it.
Yeah, they've got that encouragement, so it may very well be the direction they run in.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I hope so.
Well, let's talk about your books. Let's go ahead and
Sure.
talk about your poetry books.
Yeah.
Your first one was, which one? Certain Streets, or is it?
Yeah,
the-
certain streets at an uncertain hour.
Yeah.
That's the bright yellow one.
Yes, the
from
bright yellow
Kansas.
one.
Yeah.
It's described as a, quote, a smart, serious, hilarious first book, a no-kill shelter for memorable speech. That's an amazing quote. It brings up all sorts of questions to me. So,
was very kind.
how is your work, do you think, hilarious? Or at least in that one.
Yeah, I think it takes. Well, I try not to have it seem like it takes itself too seriously.
Okay, that's a start.
And yeah, like everyday situations. There's a few in that book where it's like I was with my kids at the museum, and like there's at the Natural History Museum in Lawrence, Kansas, like the display about the least weasel. Like I made some observations about like the weasel. Like it's small, but it's pretty much the toughest animal around. And
Weasels are.
yeah, and so just things like that, and like little. There's like a found poem where I was just waiting at a dental clinic, and it was someone had called wanting to know about dentures, and I just kind of started writing down what the receptionist was saying to the person who wouldn't take no for an answer on the phone, and it ended up being, I guess, a poem.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see where dentures could be, funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those little feisty weasels.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an element in your poetry. What you're saying is you're not trying to take your work over seriously or yourself. And I think sometimes in any written work that that can happen. I teeter on the edge of that myself, and so but my nature is to be kind of snarky funny, so I let that slip in. And
Yeah.
people say, wait, that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But it's subtle, they don't expect it, I think.
Yeah.
And I bet they're not expecting it about your poetry, and then they come across it, and that's even more delightful.
Yeah, like at readings, I try to read things that are that the audience is not going to like tune out and drift off. Like I try to keep them short and like I talked about before, like the everyday language, and use humor, and maybe tell a story, or like a short slice of life, and
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So who do you see as your audience?
I would say anyone who's happens along, whether they want to be there or not. Like, I think maybe people who don't know that. I try to win over people who think they don't like poetry, maybe, and show that it
Find
can
it
be,
very accessible.
Yeah, it can be fun. Just make it fun. I hear complaints about my kids don't want to go to a poetry reading because who wants to go to a poetry reading? But like, just try one out, and you might stumble on something that is memorable, something that is you might enjoy it, even if it's a bad experience overall. There might be a word or an image that you take away from it that can make it worth your while.
Okay.
Or,
Good.
yeah. I want to kind of win people over to the
Oh, absolutely.
to read it first and then try it themselves, and yeah.
If they walk away from it inspired or have something new to chew on or think about, that's That's the bonus. That's the gravy on top.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
And another memory that just, if I can, maybe an earlier poetic sensibility experience before even before the Jello Fellow poem. In kindergarten, my teacher was Mrs. Padding, and which is what a glorious name for a soft, round, huggable kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Padding. And
That's wonderful.
on St. Patrick's Day, she had a contest a vote to see whether the class would vote for her to be Mrs. O. Padding or Mrs. Mick Padding for the day. And the results came in, and it was like 29-1. I was outnumbered. And the whole class chose O. Padding.
Oh.
And I just remember being
Irish.
feeling outnumbered, indignant, because I thought, to me, yeah, maybe Mick is Scottish, and maybe the class was right. But I felt like I was right because, sound-wise, Mrs. Mick,
you were going for
M
that
sound and the
alliteration
I
there, yeah.
sound, and I thought,
Yeah.
that's the clear answer. And then only recently, I had a revelation where the great Shel Silverstein poem, Mrs. McTwitter, the babysitter, who grossly misinterpreted her role as a sitter, and tragically, she was a literalist. She was, she wasn't Mrs. O'Twitter, she was Mrs. McTwitter. So
I see your influence. I see your influence.
Thank you,
there,
Shel
man.
Silverstein. What a joy to be understood. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about your next book, Preyed On at the Y.
Yeah, that is, that's a cancer book. My wife had cancer at age 39, and
So young.
like poems, yeah, really. And I didn't set out to, but poems happen, and
Poems
then
happen when
there's a small batch and a chapbook sized collection, and it got published by Seven Kitchens Press in Cincinnati. Very a one-man operation, limited run of 49 editions. But even with that, I think Jana my wife approves of almost all the poems in that collection, and we try to. Some of them are funny poems, I think. They try to find the
Ease your way through
humor.
the situation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
totally understand that. It's a beautiful cover, too.
Oh,
the
thanks.
floral cover. I
Yeah.
really love that.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and move on to, before you do some reading for us, I want to ask you about your latest book, which is just a little while after that second one, Triple Number 20. Can you explain the concept of that?
So there's 3 chapbooks in one house, basically. And
One collection, one book.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's 3 different
Yeah,
chapbooks.
yeah. So it was 3 for the price of 1 kind of deal, and
Yeah.
I was happy to be in good company there. There's that is actually kind of a selection of a larger manuscript that I'm shopping around right now called Pedestrian Domestic,
Okay.
and it's that is a lot of them are poems that draw from when I was a stay-at-home dad. Domestic poems, but beyond, and some of the poems that are in that chapbook are in that larger collection. I'll read a couple of those.
Yes. And it's 3 different poets that are in that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think there's 2 poets and
one non-fiction.
Yeah, Forrest Roth, who was in the English department at Marshall, also is in that one as well.
Okay.
So
That's prose.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I have a copy of that, and I don't seem to remember
Yes.
seeing that prose.
Yep.
So, since you mentioned reading, why don't you go ahead and read some poems for us?
Okay. Let's see. Why don't I? Since we were just talking about that, the pedestrian domestic, this and humor and from this is kind of a parenthood poem maybe, and it was originally in this journal Rattle. It's called "Is There Anything I Can Do?" Today again, I found myself unable to answer a simple question from my daughter: what makes the wind? Also, I improperly wiped my son's nose, I'm told, dragged snot all across his face. I'm told I need to learn how to pinch. Well, speaking of which, yesterday I zipped his neck into his coat. Poor kid. I didn't know till he gathered his breath, started shrieking, kept clutching his throat. Yes, I tried unzipping it. Wouldn't come. He just screamed louder, cried harder. People gathered to check out the racket. Libby from the duplex stood staring, both hands covering her mouth. Is there anything I can do? She eventually hollered, ever the helpful neighbor. Libby, could you tell me what makes the wind? Libby, I don't know how to pinch. But then I knew I would have to hurt my son again to help him. I braced his body, pinned his arms, pulled down hard on the zipper, and then to his pain and his rage was added incomprehension. It shot across his face as he looked at me helpless, as he looked with a fierce and a temporary hate, because this time the zipper came undone from his skin. Praise God. Hey, Libby, I think we got it, I said. I zipped up his neck, I added, in case she hadn't gathered.
Oh, my neck hurts.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
goodness. Bless
he's
his heart.
still. Let's see, and then we mentioned the cancer chat book,
Yeah.
and kind of like what poetry can be. One thing that I like about poetry is that you can it can be outside of yourself. Poetry doesn't. It can be fiction, I suppose. Persona poems are something that I'm very interested in, and I'm working on a manuscript of poems from other that aren't me, and that's very liberating to be able to try to write from someone else's perspective. Sometimes they're made up. Most of the times they're stolen from people I interact with, and I try to capture a sense or the essence of them.
Not stolen, just capturing
yeah,
the essence. Let's
yeah.
not steal.
Liberated, yeah. So this one is, it's called The Breast Cancer Center Hug Lady, and it's a real lady. That's so this is a persona poem by her, channeling her, we'll say.
Okay.
Edwards Comprehensive Cancer Center, Huntington, West Virginia. Oh my God, I'm a miracle. That's what you need to keep saying to yourself, because you are. Look at you with your little beautiful shaped head. Look at that, just perfect. Your mom did it right. She must have really carried you around, not left you lying. And I see your husband is taking some very good notes there. That's all right. Keep that up, bub. Save them and look back on it when this is all, well, and it's a treasure. And don't forget, put your emotions in there too. Now, sweetie, have you been using your coloring book? We also have a survivor dinner come October and a walk, Colors for Cancer. You ought to go. Bring him too. The only thing you really need right now, though, with that little sweet round head of yours is some big earrings, hoopy ones. Now, typically I hand out, and I do this with everybody, this little brochure for the American Cancer Society's preferred wig shop. But you can sure take it or leave it. All right, I do have to go visit with some of the other patients, survivors, all my brave and beautiful. But before I do, I think you know what has to come first. I didn't get this title for nothing. It's on the name tag, see? Come on, come here. There we go.
Oh,
all right, that was the Breast Cancer Center Hug Lady. And
wow.
I hope she's still there, still doing that.
Hug lady.
The Hug Lady,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, that's very healing.
Yeah, it was.
I get it.
It was cool.
I get it.
Yeah. And so I do have, should I read a couple other ones, or should I wait till later? For
No,
those?
no, go ahead and
Okay.
read one
So
more.
these are both in the new manuscript that I hope becomes a book someday, Pedestrian Domestic. Doesn't have to be the title, but that's the working title. And I'm going to read these both because they're Huntington based, and they're river. They both happen on a river, I think, and a couple of my favorite poets, Ron Houchin and Rachel Hicks, seem to write about rivers a lot. So this is called Mannequin in the River, Huntington, West Virginia, and then the NEQIN in mannequin is in parentheses. So it caused some alarm, yes, panic and response. Before it proved plastic, it was definitely the body of a man. Or a woman, certainly, certainly. Just floating past town, drifting down the mighty Ohio. Citizens were involved. The law, state police, 2 fire departments, the swift water rescue team, a chopper, a boat, a barge redirected. A lieutenant cut short a rare talk with his son. "Keith, I gotta go," he said. A driver on the bridge to Ohio looked down and to his right a beat too long and had to slam the brakes. It wrenched his lower back, and so much for that Pepsi Brenda cracked open and set on the console before twisting and reaching to fix Liam's car seat, the belt of which, the boy had been insisting, was way, 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 way too tight. What the hell was going on below? Eventually, everyone was relieved it was a dummy, but also kind of annoyed, you know? Mm-hmm. So that was the mannequin in the river.
Mm-hmm. And that's in an anthology,
that was in
right?
a journal,
literary magazine.
Yeah, Appalachian Journal called Jelly Bucket.
Okay.
Yeah. And do I have time for this one?
One more.
Okay, and this is called Group with Strings, Huntington, West Virginia. At the river, a red balloon floats above and past me, drifting over the Ohio now, headed now for Ohio, the Ohio, state where my son and my daughter first lived. Then a blue one, or is it purple? Signs, these balloons, either way, maybe I'm in the right place. And then a whole group of them, dozens, 100 next time I look up. So I turn and check to see about their origins. Where are you from, you flocking balloons? And how high will you get? And how far in this life? And will you remember your Huntington days? There's a group of people on a hilltop. Some are in dresses, most of them aren't. They stand and watch. What have we done? I think about whether it's litter, but then I let it go. One of the balloons was a golden star. Most of them were hearts.
Lovely. Lovely poems, Jeff. And they
Thank you.
really are accessible.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate
Just-
that.
Just
Yeah.
lovely. Thank you for reading those.
Thanks
We've
for
got a
letting
couple.
me.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left here. So let's talk
Yeah.
about your upcoming projects
Sure. Yeah.
and end up with that.
Yeah. Let's see. So, like I mentioned, there's a couple books in the works. The Persona poems and the Pedestrian Domestic ones. And also, there's one that kind of started around the Me Too time that
Yes.
deals with some childhood like abuse issues. And I've published some of those poems already, and I'm hoping that the larger collection gets picked up and maybe in memoir form at some point too. But yeah, those are the three kind of things that I'm working on, but spending more time not working on, if I'm being honest, and like avoiding. Those are the three biggest things that I'm avoiding right now.
This is what writers do.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
we get busy.
Yeah.
You know, you're busy with the library, you're busy with your children, you're busy with your wife, and you know, community and poetry and that sort of thing. I understand it completely. So, so maybe a memoir someday.
Hopefully, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So you'll write about your childhood, growing up, where you came from, and maybe your where your family was originally from. Some of your ancestors are
That's
from
true,
the
too.
Netherlands. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're
Okay. All right.
we are Dutch folk.
Dutch folk.
Yeah,
I like the way
yeah.
you say that. So tell me, real quick.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand you have a cat.
Yep, yeah.
So what is your cat's name?
Cat's name is Bean, B-E-A-N, but somehow sometimes it gets called Being, B-E-I-N-G, or
All right.
with the spell type,
Okay.
the spell check. But
Love it.
Yeah,
Okay. Well,
he's a-
thank you, Jeff. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
you being here today. And
Thanks for
folks,
having me.
I look forward to seeing you the next time. This is West Virginia author and your host, Kat Pleska. Ta-ta. Till the next time. Bye-bye.